Hi, we're Nia and Marianne from Seren Health Coaching. We are metabolic health coaches who are passionate about good metabolic health for everyone. We also love to chat about all things health and to share as much information as we can with people who want to make changes to their lifestyle but aren't quite sure where to start. We're going to release a new episode every Friday where we talk about a different aspect of health. So do subscribe and let us know what you think. We'd also love to know what you're interested in too. So if there's something that you'd like us to have a chat about, do send us a message and we'll do our best to cover it soon. Good morning, Marianne.
Hi, Nia.
This week we are going to talk about blue zones, which is a
Oh,
topic that I've heard you talk about a lot and I know you're very interested in. But I also know that you've somewhat shifted your initial perspective of the blue zones over time.
yeah,
And it's quite popular, isn't it, as a topic to talk about. There
yeah.
are some people who have a lot to say about the blue zones, but we thought we would just sort of do a roundup of all the information and what we can learn from them.
I became really fascinated by the blue zones when I first heard about them because it seemed such an easy way to look at health as you age. And as I'm
Mm.
aging, I'm probably more interested in this matter than maybe you are. But I thought how incredible to go around as a scientist and look at areas in the world where people lived both longest. I mean, originally, probably that was the impetus, was the longest, so
Yeah.
longevity, but also in terms of the quality of life. So both of those things come into play in the blue zones because actually they're connected. So if you have a
Mm.
population where you have a lot of people over 100, there must be something they're doing in terms of health. So
To
we're
live
not
that
talking
long.
about, people that are immobilized and very ill in the last 10 years of their life, which often happens, by the way, in the developed world.
Mm,
So I
mm.
got really interested. I thought, there'll be a recipe in here that I can use, and then I can live forever and dig my garden when I'm 102 and ride a bike, and I'll be really cool. Um, but it isn't quite as
Quite that
simple as
simple.
that.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. So let's pretend that nobody knows what they are. So what are the blue zones? Where in the world can we find them? Are they all together or are they widely dispersed?
Yeah, widely dispersed, but there are some interesting sort of threads. So, often rural areas,
Hmm.
and quite often islands, interestingly, which might be a sort of clue, but not all, but generally not, they're not cities. So we're talking about places like Icaria in Greece, which is a
Hmm.
tiny island, Sardinia in Italy,
Hmm.
Okinawa in Japan, which is probably the most well known, Nicoya in Costa Rica, but and also interestingly, somewhere called Loma Linda in California, which is it's near Los Angeles actually, but it's a community of Adventists
Hmm.
that might be teaching us a few lessons on the power of faith, friendship, and fruit.
Ooh,
So yes, quite
quite
different
where, yeah,
places.
quite varied. Yeah. Are there any
Mm.
in the UK?
No, there's none in the UK. We are an island, but of course,
I know, I was thinking,
incredibly populated. I'm trying to make one down where I live, but it's not going that well.
it's
So
because
what
I'm
you
not
learn
with you,
is
Marianne.
what you learn is how really important your environment is if you want to live well
Mm.
into your dotage. And maybe living in the developed world is not the place to be. But there you go. That California, that the Loma Linda um, community are
Well, yeah, I
disproving
mean,
that. So
look, there's exactly because, California is incredibly built up,
yeah,
isn't it? So,
and it's next to Los Angeles. One of the
yeah,
biggest, most developed cities in the world. So
yeah,
I think
sprawling.
it can be done. It can be
It
done.
can be
But
done.
there's
Yeah. I think it all comes down to other things, that I was listening to a professor, Shane O'Mara. He's a neuroscientist. He talks about walking and he says, the trouble with the way that we've set up our developed world is that we haven't set up our developed world to walk. So, in some
exactly.
areas of America, you cannot walk to the
No,
shops, which is
exactly.
mad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas, here, sometimes I would think I'm going to take the car, but I would just walk out of my front door and go to the
You
shops
can. You can walk
because I
out your front
can.
door. Yeah. And the other interesting thing I read recently was that we always think if you live out of cities in rural areas that you're more likely to walk. But that
Mm,
isn't actually true. So you're
no.
probably more likely to cover more miles walking in London than you are
Mm,
in rural Dorset. Because to be honest, unless you make a real point of walking in Dorset, you're going to get in your car to do most of your daily errands
yeah.
because you live rurally. So, there's all these threads to this, but I've always been really interested in how to live well older. And the Blue Zones really appeals to me in terms of what can I learn from this that I
Mm,
can transfer into my own life or even into my client's life as a health coach.
mm. Fab. Me.
So that was the first thing. The other thing is that they looked very carefully at the diets of these people because they thought there must be some common denominators there. And
Hmm.
and there is sort of because they're often plant based. So the diets are often not necessarily exclusively plant, but plant rich,
Hmm.
let's call it. Some areas do eat meat, some don't. Some drink alcohol, some don't. Some drink a lot of green tea, some don't.
Yeah.
Some eat a lot of Bulgarian yogurt, for instance. Fermented foods come up, but there's not a sort of really, this is the diet that's going to make you live a long time. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that it was really another really strong sort of thread in this was that these people were very active
Mm,
into old age. So we're talking about living independently, digging gardens, growing vegetables, riding bicycles, but often walking up hills to see
yeah.
friends. No, there was no gyms, by the way, which was interesting. In any of the blue zones, it was all generally day to day
Daily
activity.
activity. Yeah. So when
Uh,
we're talking about these people and their lifestyles, and you said that they actually have a very different diet depending on which blue zone they live in, um, and but they're all very active. So there's we're looking for sort of the things that we can pull out to say, well, we
yes,
want to we
yes,
want to emulate this.
yes.
But what is maybe the one thing that you would say that all of these blue zones have that is even greater than diet, that is even greater than activity? What's the one thing you'd
And
say?
that was really surprising. So I think we all thought the thing that would come out was those nice basic things. But the
Yeah.
thing that was most important and the thread that went through all the blue zones was the sense of community that people had as they grow older. So
Mm,
it is parts of the world where the elderly are not ignored. They they enjoy this bit of their lives.
mm,
They'll often meet in the sort of town square for tea. They do exercise together. They look after each other. A lot of them grow their own vegetables, cook for themselves, look after grandchildren. They have a real purpose in life, I think, within those communities.
mm.
So that probably of everything was the strongest link. So if you want to live a long time, start living actively within a community
And
because
tea.
that's
Yeah.
probably the thing that's going to make you live longer. So that was really interesting. I really like
Yeah.
that.
I like the interesting thing about that is that, so often in a westernized society, after you
Mm,
retire, you're sort of looked down on as, you're
yeah.
past it now, you're
Yeah.
done.
Well, you're not
Uh,
useful anymore.
you're not
Yeah.
useful anymore. But they kind of revere
Mm,
these older people who have wisdom, who have
yes.
so much experience in life,
Yes.
and they really look up to them, and they listen to them, and they value them, which I think we don't do very well in the westernized world.
But if you think about it, the elderly in the developed world tend to need care on the
Yes.
whole. So the fact is, in these societies where people are self-caring and autonomous and live long and mobile lives,
Mm.
with cognitive decline less as well, by the
I
way,
was just
you
about to ask about that because obviously that's a huge issue
all linked,
in our
all
world.
linked. Yeah,
We do tend to find, don't we, that the older generation very quickly uh,
yeah,
often related to a sense of loss of purpose, actually,
Yes,
seem to
exactly.
decline cognitively, and then we get Alzheimer's and
So
other memory disorders.
So if you look into a society and how they look after their elderly, a lot of these people don't need looking after. So it's much easier in a way to rever your elderly if they're not a
Mm,
huge drain on your cultural society. So you
yes.
can see sort of how it works both ways, you know.
Mm.
But that's
And
probably the thing I learnt most.
mm, okay. And are they living with their families or still independently
No,
from their
not
families?
necessarily, but often within a radius of their family. So,
Mm,
um, depending on the culture, either with or, but certainly within a distance of seeing their family and being useful to they're still a useful member of that family
yeah.
or friend or community group. There were some interesting groups, I think, in Japan where as you grow older, you pay into a sort of club,
Mm.
which then promises to look after you. So it's almost a sort of elderly insurance policy, which
Yeah.
sounded really interesting. So imagine a lot of them have lost their husbands because women tend to live a bit longer than men, and with that loss, they join a woman's only sort of club, which
Yeah.
then looks after them
Mm,
if they need looking after. It was a really interesting sort of sideline. But
mm,
basically, live in a community where people care about each other, whether you're rich materially or not, doesn't seem to really make a difference. But
yeah.
that community really does, and it could be a religious community, it could be a town community, it could be anything. By the way, they have in America tried to create some blue zone areas,
Yes. And
and
how
there's certainly
successful
some.
have they been?
Well, they have been quite successful. There's some cities in Texas, I think, where a
Okay.
mayor got really interested in doing this. Well, you can't change an environment overnight, so you can't, build craggy hills where people all become shepherdesses. It's not quite like that, is it?
No,
But within
we're
the
not.
constraints of a Texan city,
Yes.
they put in some resources into bike lanes, helping people to walk places,
Mm,
outdoor gyms, and started to look at food provision and access to healthy food. And it did make a difference. Something I read was there was a 30% drop in hospital admissions in that particular city. It's definitely, an interesting move for the future, actually.
mm. Okay. Well, that's really fascinating. Thank you. I think that's a really nice little summary.
One maybe slight word to finish on is that
Mm,
in some of these areas, Okinawa in Japan was really held up as the sort of top island for living a long time.
yeah.
But this only applies to that post-war generation who are now very
Ah,
elderly. And when you look down to the next age group, it isn't transferring. And particularly young people now are not going to get the same benefits. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But partly it's to do with access to ultra processed food and more sedentary living with screens and
yeah.
cars. So as societies get more, materially richer,
Yes.
some of the benefits disappear.
So the
Of
argument really for a simple life is strong
Yes,
because you will live
yes,
longer. Yeah.
exactly. And
Fascinating.
your environment is hugely important in terms of
Mm,
how you live and your health. Particularly as you age. So I suppose that's what I've learned from the blue zones. I'm still fascinated by them, and I still try to create my own little blue zone. But I can't get to the local supermarket without my car, so it's not so
not so easy. Yeah.
easy.
I
No.
think, but maybe we learn a few lessons from the
Yeah,
blue zones.
exactly.
We sort of take what we can, and um, ultimately not because we're definitely wanting to live and to be 122, but just
No.
because we want to age well, and we know that keeping our metabolic health will help us with aging and aging well. I'm sure that we will bring the blue zones into our conversations and the things that we've learned from the blue zones in the future as well. Okay, we'll see you soon.
I'm sure we will. Bye.
Bye.